West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Contributing writer at The Atlantic, Elliot Cohen, writes about President Biden's historic visit to Ukraine in a new piece for the magazine titled Biden Just Destroyed Putin's Last Hope. In it, Cohen writes, quote, symbols matter, a Kennedy or a Reagan at the Berlin Wall, a Churchill with a cigar and a bowler. For that matter, a green-clad Zelensky growling, I need ammunition, not a ride. Simply by taking the hazardous trip to Kyiv, Biden made a strategic move of cardinal importance. While the president clearly intended to bolster the confidence of Ukraine and the commitment of ambivalent Europeans and neo-isolationist Americans, his real audiences lay elsewhere. As his remarks about Western strength indicated, Russia has cycled through a series of theories of victory in Ukraine. It's been reduced to one last hope, that Vladimir Putin's will is stronger than Joe Biden's. And Biden just said by deed as well as word, oh, no, it's not. That is a gut punch to Russia's leader. The Russians received word of the trip. We are informed, and presumably the threat stated or implied, that they would get a violent and overwhelming response if they attempted to interfere with it, end quote. Join us now, staff writer at The Atlantic, Tom Nichols, and former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations, Hagar Shamali. She also worked at the NSC and the Treasury Department. Good morning to you both. Hagar, I'll start with you. The significance of seeing the President of the United States walk through the streets of Kyiv with President Zelensky yesterday is what?
First, the logistical feat that it takes for the White House, the military, the Secret Service to get the U.S. president to a war zone where there is no U.S. military presence is very significant. But the fact that they had it now a year later, right before the year anniversary, and you have Biden there hugging President Zelensky, saying that the U.S. support will endure and will be here. What he's saying is that we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here until you defeat Russia. But also, when you couple that with the military support, he now announced an additional $500 million in military aid, additional sanctions. What he's trying to say is, we're going to be here for you, but also we want to get to the end of this as quickly as possible. It's very symbolic, very impressive.
And Joe, we've been talking this morning about some of the details of this trip, completely in secret. A small group of people at the White House knew it was happening. It was weeks and really months in the making. The president wanted to make this trip as he watched other world leaders walk through the streets of Kyiv with Zelensky. There was a plane that was not the usual Air Force One that took him. There was a long train ride from Poland into Kyiv. There was a motorcade with no sirens or lights on to get him in quietly. And then the images we just saw there of him walking confidently through the streets of Kyiv with President Zelensky.
Just a remarkable journey for Joe Biden. I mean, you read a recounting of it in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. It reads like a movie script. All of the diversions, all of the things that he had to do to get to Kyiv and shake the hands of President Zelensky and walk around Zelensky and show the people of Ukraine his support for him. Tom Nichols, it's probably hard for us to actually be able to put into words just what that meant, not only to President Zelensky, but more importantly, to the people of that war-torn country.
And to the world. This was, a president of the United States doing something that the Secret Service didn't want him to do, that people didn't expect him to do, took us all by surprise, and walked through an actual war zone. Aside from, we've just been talking about the logistics of it, the idea that an American president would take that personal risk is really something. And I think that's partly why you're seeing the outrage that you're seeing from Putin, who doesn't go anywhere without being in a cocoon of guards and armored trains and cars, and also here in the United States for Biden's opponents. I mean, this was the Joe Biden that's not supposed to exist. This very active and vital guy taking on a punishing schedule. I mean, I got tired just thinking. I've done some overseas trips with politicians. I got tired just thinking about the schedule. And so, Biden, I think, really surprised a lot of people on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think he's right that NATO has never been stronger. And it's a remarkable turnaround for an alliance that, just 10 years ago was thinking about what its role in the world was supposed to be.
Yeah, we need to underline this fact, Tom. You and I both former members of the Republican Party. Before I criticize members of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell and most Republicans in the United States Senate have been traditional, taken the traditional stand of Republicans. They've stood shoulder to shoulder with Joe Biden in our defense of freedom. But you look at, like, for instance, Ron DeSantis, who actually went on Fox News yesterday and said that Putin doesn't really pose a risk to his neighbors. And it's absolutely painful.
It's eye-watering.
It's absolutely painful, especially a guy who wants to take control of a party that Ronald Reagan once led and went to the Brandenburg Gate and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. What a way to devolve for a party.
Ron DeSantis and other Republicans don't want this next election, or really anything, to be about foreign policy. It's their Achilles heel. They don't know anything about it. They don't care. The base they have to deal with is actively hostile to any discussion of foreign policy. Partly, it is that anti-Zelensky, anti-Biden reflex, but partly because the Republicans have abandoned the internationalist, the kind of muscular internationalism that Reagan brought to the end of the Cold War, and adopted a kind of sour know-nothingism about foreign policy. And those are the primary voters. And this is, I think, why you're seeing the House being, the House members somewhat difficult, more difficult than the Senate members, because that's the very core of the GOP base. Those are the primary voters that they have to get past. And those voters don't want to hear anything about foreign policy or NATO or Ukraine or Zelensky, because they watch a lot of TV and they don't know much more else.
Yeah. Jim.
Hagar, I wanted to ask you, too, you've worked so much on sanctions policy in the past in all of your different jobs. We haven't spent a lot of time recently talking about whether this could all fall apart, because remember in the beginning, it was like, oh, countries won't come together on this. They will not do the same level of sanctions. What's your assessment looking at this on what the challenges may be for the Treasury Department, a place where you spent some time?
Sure. Well, sanctions, as a rule, they take time to work. And that's the case with anything, right? When we think about Iran, for example, and when we got to those negotiations, it took years of those sanctions working, undermining their oil proceeds, bringing Iran to its knees to the negotiating table. And so with Russia, when you're talking about the advanced heavy sanctions that you have now, they've only been in place for a year. You've had sanctions since 2014. You and I both worked on them when we were in government together. But they're very different now. They are very forceful. I will note that the Treasury Deputy Secretary Secretary Wally Adeyemo, a friend of mine, is speaking today at the Council on Foreign Relations, where he will talk about the latest in the effect of sanctions. What I've seen is that he will be saying that due to sanctions, the U.S. and from the West, Russia has lost 9,000 pieces of military equipment. 50% of their tanks are down. So there is a real cause and effect here when it comes to sanctions. But as a rule, and this is the case for everything, sanctions are one piece of a foreign policy strategy. They're not the silver bullet in achieving a national security objective. They work when coupled with diplomatic efforts, military efforts, humanitarian efforts, whatever it might be. And in this case, and given especially Biden's announcement in Ukraine to expect additional sanctions against Russia sanctions evaders and other elements that support its military, I would expect all of that to ramp up even further this year.
It is Wednesday, the 22nd of February of 2023. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Oh, you say I'm mocking your religion. Well, it's my religion too, so I can mock it all I care to mock. All right, how are you? Well, looks like Joe made quite a splash by going into a war zone, and the Putin contingent, the Putin caucus in the House, at least, they are very, very angry. So much so that we need to have a national divorce. You would expect a woman who is going through a divorce right now to bring that up. Yeah, red states and blue states. All right. Well, we went through this already one time before. If she had, at least studied a little bit of it, she would know. Unfortunately, her study addressed it from the point of view as the war of the northern aggressors. Mm-hmm. Not the slaveholders who declared war on the United States of America. How is it that the North are the aggressors when the war was declared on the North by the South? And they had a constitution that said we're doing it because no one's taken away our slaves. No one. How do you think we can do any business? Jeez, we had to compete on a level playing field. We wouldn't be able to do it. We need a leg up. We need affirmative action. Why? See, that's all they're about. They always harp that a contract is a contract, and if they can get you to sign a contract to basically work for free, they're not working for free. We give them a little hovel and some gruel to eat. Nothing's for free. But if you sign that contract, you're beholden to it, apparently, no matter whether in any civilized society it would be considered illegal for one to be able to do that to another human being. But obviously, we are not part of civilized society. We want to be able to enslave our fellows, and our gals, too. All right. They call themselves white Christian nationalists with glee. We're not supposed to mock that. Yeah, I mock it. All right. Maybe I'm not mocking the idea. How about we just mock the people who believe in it? Oh, you can't do that. They don't have any volition. They're just pawns in the game, moving along by the mysterious hand of the great beyond. Yeah, okay. That's a good excuse for not taking personal responsibility. Notice how they always harp about personal responsibility, and yet they are incapable of exercising it personally themselves. All right. They always show you what they are, and they pretty much project. Okay. And the Fox Propaganda Network, they're embracing this Divorce America. Well, why wouldn't they? They're looking at 1 point, how much billion? 1.7? It's $1 billion. Doesn't make anybody happy. Yeah, Rupert can pay it and goes, oh, man, that really sucked. But it's not really going to hurt him, is it? I think that something that would hurt him would be, I don't know, maybe a little bit of personal retribution upon these scofflaws to representative democracy. We don't really believe in the destruction of representative democracy, but it brings in better ratings than just doing the same old. Gotta shake it up for ratings. Okay. So does that mean that when an entity gets to a certain economic level, they don't really care about how the world exists anymore? And if it gets destroyed, who cares, as long as they're making money? Isn't that what big oil has been doing for decades and decades and decades? 100 years, more than 100 years. Well, not more than 100 years. I'm sorry. That'd take us to the 1820s. 1920s. Yeah, more than 100 years. Where am I? We're in the 21st century, not the 20th. What year is it? No, the century. What century am I in? So, yeah, well over 100 years they've been pushing this lie on us. Yeah, it looks dirty out there, but we're making money. I've told the story before that when I was still a greenhorn out in the oil fields, I was in this area called a tank farm, and I asked, what is that smell? And it was gasoline is what I was smelling. And compared to, the other parts of the oil field, I mean, there's sulfur. It just smells bad. And this gasoline smelled different. And one of the old roughnecks said, smells like money. And I pulled out, I was a kid. I was in my 20s. Had been a teacher, too. But I was making more money in the oil fields than teaching kids, indoctrinating kids into the American ideal of representative democracy. Couldn't make any money at that. So I pulled out some dollar bills, some bills, and I smelled them. And it doesn't smell like money. But it took me a little while. But then I understood what they meant. What we were doing there was the smell of money. That's how they justified it. They were literally drilling into the bowels of the earth. You've heard that term before, the bowels of the earth. You know why they call it the bowels of the earth? Because it smells to high heaven. Puncture that and it lets off a lot of noxious gases, and it smells bad. So you justify it by saying, well, at least I'm making money. Down in the bottom of the coal mines, breathing all that coal dust. It's okay. I'm going to have silica lung, but at least I'm making money. Yes, you are. Everybody's got to do what they got to do, and some people will do it anyway, even though it's detrimental to their health, because at least they are making money. Now, it's one thing to be locked into it and say, I have to do this because I have to make money, versus the other side of, I'm not going to stop destroying the earth. I'm making money. So much for the enlightened despots, huh? Jeez. So much for noblesse oblige. Yeah, noblesse oblige and socialism. Okay. I was thinking about that, because I was thinking about that. Don't ask me how I make these associations. Now, I've been seeing a lot of right-wing porno types, porno girls, porno star types. And it always I don't know, kind of makes me laugh a little bit. A lot of repression over on that side that they need to have all this. And so then, of course, because they have no personal responsibility, they have no capability of being able to, I don't know, moderate their behavior, they'll just succumb to their weakest desires or their strongest desires. They're weak to them. So they say, well, we got to get rid of porn. And then they call the most innocuous things porn, you know? Oh, wow, there's a kid's books about seahorses and daddies carry the babies in their pouch. Oh, no, we can't teach that. What will the kiddies think? It's sick. Totally sick. And then I was thinking, well, we're not bereft ourselves on our side of, having sex workers, except our sex workers are unionized and their sex workers are wildcatters. Which means, I suppose, our sex workers are socialists because they're unionized. And theirs are, everything sounds like capitalism to me. If there was no demand, there would be no supply. Okay. Edmund Burke came up with that, some people say. Mm-hmm. All right, well, enough of that conjecture about whatever. We would be unable to discuss this in an academic setting in Florida, so think how lucky we are. All righty, what's on the rest of the menu here as we begin in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? And it's, of course, a lovely egg dish with a velvety hollandaise sauce. Stop thinking bad thoughts. On the rest of the menu, here's something good. The EPA ordered Norfolk Southern to clean up the East Palestine Ohio toxic derailment. I really get peeved at that CEO. He's blaming Joe Biden for it. Well, of course he would. The Minnesota Senate approved restoring voting rights for felons just in time for, a bunch of MAGAs to say, no, you don't. And anti-abortion groups suing to ban the abortion pill lost their bid for an early trial. And what's odd about this is that this is the Texas judge Kaczynski, I believe is how it's pronounced, who's a MAGA Republican. Wonder what he has up his sleeve. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Putin's war accelerated the European Union's transition to green energy. Thanks, Vlad. And Venice's smaller canals have practically dried up due to a prolonged spell of low tides. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And, Patreon makes it pretty easy for you to become a recurring Patreon. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, that really helps us pay our bills and the other incurred costs that keep incurring. And it really does help us. So thank you to those of you who have recently become recurring Patreons of Netroots Radio. And I just cannot tell you how much it helps. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those, and thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, sometimes even before the show starts. Isn't that fun? Hey, I read, though, that a couple of front pagers at Daily Kos haven't been able to log on to Twitter to be able to post diaries. And apparently Daily Kos might have had their account suspended by Elon. We'll see. They were on a mobile app, a couple of them. So we'll see. Maybe that's just a bug in the system, since he's fired everybody that could fix them. But I wouldn't put it above him to start purging the site of, all of us anti-free speech people, liberal representative democracy left. Yeah. All right. If you would also like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do that at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. This first offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is from the Associated Press by John Sewer and Michael Rubencam. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency ordered Norfolk Southern to pay for the cleanup of the East Palestine, Ohio train wreck and chemical release, as federal regulators took charge of long-term recovery efforts and promised worried residents they won't be forgotten. Speaking to reporters near the derailment site, Norfolk Southern CEO promised to undertake necessary steps to ensure the long-term health of the community and become a safer railroad. EPA used its authority under the federal Superfund law to order Norfolk Southern to take all available measures to clean up contaminated air and water. Well, they better do in the soil, too. It also said the company would be required to reimburse the federal government for a new program to provide cleaning services for impacted residents and businesses. Norfolk Southern will pay for cleaning up the mess that they created and the trauma they inflicted on this community, EPA Administrator Michael Regan vowed at a press conference in East Palestine. I know this order cannot undo the nightmare that families in this town have been living with, but it will begin to deliver much-needed justice for the pain that Norfolk Southern has caused. He warned that if Norfolk Southern fails to comply, the agency will perform the work itself and seek triple damages from the company. EPA planned to release more details on the cleanup service for residents and businesses, which it said would provide an additional layer of reassurance. The agency said its order marked the end of the emergency phase of the February 3rd derailment and the start of the long-term remediation. Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw reiterated promises to restore the site and invest in the community. From day one, I've made the commitment that Norfolk Southern is going to remediate the site. We're going to do continuous long-term air and water monitoring, and we're going to help the residents of this community recover, and we're going to invest in the long-term health of this community, and we're going to make Norfolk Southern a safer railroad, he told reporters. Jeff Zalek, who lives with his 100-year-old mother just blocks from the derailment site, said he's waiting for his home to be cleaned before moving back. He said there's still a chemical smell inside, though not nearly as bad as a week ago. The walls need scrubbing, and he wants air purifiers installed before allowing his mother back. I just want to make sure she's safe, he said. She's ready to come home. She cries every day. In a tweet sent after the EPA announcement, President Joe Biden said the Trump administration and other elected officials have hampered efforts to improve rail safety. We'll continue to hold rail companies accountable when they fail to put safety first. But first, we've got Norfolk Southern's mess to clean, he said. I want affected residents to know that we've got your back. EPA's move to compel Norfolk Southern to clean up came nearly 3 weeks after more than 36 freight cars, including 11 carrying hazardous materials, derailed on the East Palestine outskirts near the Pennsylvania state line, prompting an evacuation as fears grew about the potential explosion of smoldering wreckage. Officials, seeking to avoid an uncontrolled blast, intentionally released and burned toxic vinyl chloride from 5 rail cars, sending flames and black smoke high into the sky. That left people questioning the potential health impacts, even as authorities maintained they were doing their best to protect people. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine assured residents they will not be left to handle the aftermath on their own once public attention turns elsewhere. Well, of course not. He was trying to turn it elsewhere long before he got caught. Steve Karnowski of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Minnesota Senate moved yesterday, Tuesday, to restore voting rights to convicted felons as soon as they get out of prison, instead of continuing to require them to complete their parole before they can cast a ballot. The Senate approved the Restore the Vote bill less than a week after the Minnesota Supreme Court upheld the state's current restrictions and left it up to the legislature to change them. Democrats behind the measure say it will help reintegrate former inmates who were disproportionately people of color back into society. The Senate approved the bill 35-30 Tuesday night and sent it to Democratic Governor Tim Walz for his promised signature. Supporters of the bill said it took an even greater urgency after the Minnesota Supreme Court last week rejected a challenge by the American Civil Liberties Union, which had argued that the state's restrictions were unconstitutional. The High Court's ruling acknowledged that 1% of white people, 6% of black people, and 9% of Native American people in Minnesota could not vote in 2018 because they had been convicted of a felony but had not completed their parole. If the right to vote was restored upon release from incarceration, it said, those percentages would have dropped to 0.1, 1.5, and 2%, respectively. 21 other states restored voting rights when people with felony convictions leave prison, including Republican-controlled North Dakota, Indiana, and Utah. Some California lawmakers are pushing to allow felons to vote even while they're still in prison, regardless of their crimes, as Maine, Vermont, and the District of Columbia already do. Residents who would regain the right to vote are often people whom the courts have deemed safe to release. and that they're working, raising families, and paying taxes. Groups representing prosecutors, public defenders, probation officers, and crime victims support the bill, as does the State Department of Corrections. Attempts by Republicans to weaken the bill failed, including one amendment to exclude people convicted of violent crimes and another that would have kept the requirement to complete parole in place, at least for those convicted of child rape. GOP Senator Warren Limmer of Maple Grove disputed Champion's assertions that probationary periods often run as long as 20 years in Minnesota. He noted that the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission around 3 years ago capped parole for most offenses at 5 years, with exceptions remaining for first-degree murder and rape. Miller told reporters during a break in the debate that felons should not regain their civil rights, in this case the right to vote, until after they've completed their full sentence, both their incarceration and probation. He also accused Democrats of getting weaker and weaker on criminals at a time when crime is already high. There are some offenders that have committed heinous crimes against innocent citizens. I don't think the Senate understands that, Limmer weeped, because this bill treats it as a one-size-fits-all. All criminals get the same treatment. Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A Texas federal judge refused to set an accelerated trial schedule for a lawsuit by anti-abortion groups seeking to end U.S. sales of the abortion pill mifepristone in a case that could severely disrupt access to medication abortion nationwide. U.S. District Judge Matthew Kaczmarek in Amarillo rejected the group's request to skip a hearing on whether to halt sales of the bill temporarily until the case is fully heard and instead go straight to trial. The Biden administration had posed the request. Anti-abortion groups, including the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, brought the case against the U.S. Food and Drug Administration last November, claiming the agency used an improper process to approve the drug in 2000 and did not adequately consider its safety for minors. That's what they say. Mifepristone is approved for medication abortion in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy in combination with another drug, misoprostol. Medication abortions account for more than half of U.S. abortions. Suing in Amarillo, where the alliance had been incorporated 3 months earlier, ensured that the case would go before Kaczmarek, a reliable conservative and former Christian activist. Former? The government has countered that the drug's approval was fully supported by evidence and that the challenge, 22 years after the fact, comes much too late. Medication abortion has drawn increasing attention since the Supreme Court last year reversed its landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling, which had guaranteed abortion rights nationwide. President Joe Biden directed federal agencies to expand access to medication abortion in response to the decision, which has allowed more than a dozen Republican-led states to adopt new abortion bans. The FDA said in a court filing last month that the public interest would be dramatically harmed by pulling mifepristone from the market, forcing women to have unnecessary surgical abortions and greatly increasing wait times at already overburdened clinics. Major medical organizations, including the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, last week weighed in on the side of the government, saying mifepristone has been thoroughly studied and is conclusively safe. State attorney generals have also submitted filings in the case, with Democrats opposing the lawsuit and Republicans supporting it. Mifepristone is also the subject of lawsuits in West Virginia and North Carolina, seeking to expand access to the drug by arguing that state restrictions on it conflict with federal law. All right, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and boy, do we have weather. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Twistin' the Night Away. Director-writer M. Night Shyamalan has had a career of twists and turns both in general and for me personally. His first two big films, The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, were notable for having surprising twists at their ends. Well, not so much twists as big reveals. But then Shyamalan made his smartest twist. He stopped writing reveals. Because seriously, who can keep that up? Especially with people now intently looking for the twist. Turns out what people like less than a weak twist is you not doing one at all, and I guess cheating them of the chance to figure you out and feel superior, whatever. People were upset. There was so much knee-jerk anti-Shyamalan fervor, I was surprised he kept getting greenlit. Meanwhile, I still loved his films. But then came another twist. Having made thrillers like a scion of Hitchcock and De Palma, Shyamalan nudged his work over into horror, and I don't like horror. I just don't. So I lost one of my favorite filmmakers. So, now here's Knock at the Cabin, my first Shyamalan film in years, and it has so many of the qualities that I loved in his earlier works. It's nicely written, it's solidly paced, he crafts scenes of emotional intimacy extremely well, along with capturing really great earnest performances from his actors, a killer 1-2 punch of skills. And yet, the movie uses a lot of the structure and filmic language of horror. I mean, for all that Knock at the Cabin examines the thin line between empathy and self-sacrifice, a line I didn't know existed, it remains, at its core, a home invasion thriller in what I call the ritual killing genre. We meet some people, get to know them, and then watch them die. Slasher films, torture porn, disaster movies, why do we make films like these? Why do we watch them? If you like them, great. Go see Knock at the Cabin. Dave Bautista's casting is inspired. I'll be rewatching Lady in the Water. And yes, I know you hated that one. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Slip it, cuff it, check it. Talk to doctor now and share it.
I get it, slip it, cuff it, check it twice a day.
I get it, slip it, cuff it, check it in the morning and before dinner.
I get it, slip it, cuff it, check it, and share it with my doctor.
Nearly 1 in 2 U.S. adults have high blood pressure. That's why it's important to self-monitor your blood pressure in 4 easy-to-remember steps. It starts with a monitor.
Now that I know my blood pressure numbers, I talked with my doctor. We're getting those numbers down.
Get it, slip it, cuff it, check it. Talk to doctor now and share it.
Be next to talk to your doctor about your blood pressure numbers. Get down with your blood pressure. Self-monitoring is power. Learn more at manageyourbp.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the American Heart Association, and the American Medical Association. in partnership with the Office of Minority Health and Health Resources and Services Administration.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job
and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Arthritis is common among veterans. Traumatic and overuse injuries during active duty are risk factors for developing arthritis. Fortunately, there are low-cost or no-cost strategies that can help veterans manage arthritis. Physical activity can reduce pain and improve function. It can also help improve mood and play a role in managing other chronic conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. You can do low-impact activities, such as walking, biking, swimming, and water aerobics, all good forms of exercise. Arthritis-specific classes can help you get started. Information on classes, exercise programs, and tools are available at cdc.gov/arthritis. These resources can help reduce pain and improve function. Learning self-management techniques can help all veterans become more active, improve their overall quality of life, and thrive.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Are the exceptions set forth in state abortion bans actually exceptions? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The Supreme Court in Dobbs robbed women of the right to make their own reproductive choices and instead empowered disproportionately male-dominated legislatures to make those decisions for women. Although many state laws that ban abortions have no exceptions for rape or for incest or for fatal birth defects, about half the states that generally ban abortion do have an exception or two in their laws. But the exceptions are so narrow and have so many preconditions or put a medical professional in so much legal jeopardy that the theoretically available abortion is in reality not available at all. Take the rape or incest exception. It's generally available only if the woman or girl reports the sexual assault to law enforcement. But 2/3 of victims don't do that. Or the exception for the life of the mother, or a fatal fetal abnormality, where the doctor has to be certain about the impending death and faces prison himself if he can't prove it. In sum, since Dobbs, state abortion ban laws that have exceptions have been functioning as if they did not have exceptions. And even if the exceptions functioned as advertised, which they don't change the fact that abortion bans are cruel and misogynist and should be unconstitutional, which for the past half-century, they were. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was the day that the shoemakers of Lynn, Massachusetts walked out on strike. The shoemakers were very concerned over how technology was changing their work. Shoemaking had long been considered a skilled craft. Making shoes was typically done as piecework in the homes of the craftsmen. Often, other family members, including the women of the household, helped to make the shoes. But technological advances transformed the industry. The introduction of the Singer sewing machine in 1852 moved more shoemaking into factories. Many young women went to work stitching at these machines. What was once considered highly skilled work was now transforming into mass production. Then, to make matters worse, in 1857, a depression swept across the nation. Shoemakers saw their wages slashed. In response, on George Washington's birthday, the shoemakers went out on strike. They demanded an industry-wide standard wage. 20,000 workers joined the strike. 20,000 more supported the striking workers at protests and parades. 2 weeks into the conflict, women from the factories took to the streets, joining the strike. But the male shoemakers were weary of joining their cause to that of the women. Predictably, this division aided in causing the strike to falter and fade. Although the strike was not successful, it drew national attention to the plight of workers. During the conflict, presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln spoke out in support of the workers. He said, "I'm glad to see that a system of labor prevails in New England in which laborers can strike when they want to, where they are not obliged to labor whether you pay them or not. I like a system that lets a man quit when he wants to and wish it might prevail everywhere." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 29 degrees Fahrenheit with ice fog. And we are expecting to be much cooler than yesterday, a high of only around 38 if we get there. Occasional snow showers, and we're having a light snow falling at the moment. Winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Snow accumulations of around an inch or more. And I should relay the message or the information that we had a little bit of repairs and picking up after quite a brisk windstorm blew through yesterday, bringing in this storm. Looks like we'll be variably cloudy tonight with snow showers, lows in the mid-20s, and winds will be light and variable. Snow accumulations around an inch or more, and then variably cloudy tomorrow with snow showers, highs around 36, winds light and variable, snow accumulations about an inch or so. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window here in the little village of Rogue River, Oregon. The air quality index for the region is good at 38 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is moderate at level 3. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.71 inches. Visibility is down to 1.5 miles. And relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's known as the Weather Underground. London is 49 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 49 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 59 degrees and sunny. Kyiv is 30 and cloudy. Kabul is 40 and clear. Hong Kong is 62 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 43 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 68 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 44 degrees, partly cloudy with heavy wind, and also a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York is 43 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Samuel Petraquin of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Russian President Vladimir Putin unwittingly accelerated the European Union's green transition with his war in Ukraine, with the 27-nation bloc reducing its dependency on Russian fossil fuels and increasing its renewable energy use over the past year, the EU's climate czar said yesterday, Tuesday. The European Union now stands that if we want to increase our energy sovereignty, it can only go through renewables, because we have very little gas left. We have almost no coal left. We have no oil. Franz Timmermans, the commissioner in charge of the European Green Deal, said. Speaking during an interview with the Associated Press ahead of Friday's one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion, Timmermans said Putin completely underestimated the EU's reliance or resilience when Moscow cut off most natural gas flows to Europe amid the war, a strategy European leaders have called energy blackmail. He's been saying publicly that this winter Europeans would freeze and starve, Timmermans said. Well, we neither froze nor starved because our food production was at high levels. There were no shortages. And our energy? We managed to make sure he didn't use this weapon in the effective way. The war, however, fueled an energy price crisis in the EU that sent the bills of households and businesses through the roof. Our citizens did have to bear the brunt of his manipulations, Timmermans added, but he didn't get us. He didn't divide us, and he certainly did not get us on our knees. In response to reduce supplies of Russian energy, the EU introduced last year countermeasures that included launching a nearly $320 billion program to promote more efficient fuel use and a faster rollout of renewable power. The EU also introduced embargoes on Russian coal and oil, accompanied by a price cap on Russian oil exports. In addition, the bloc diversified its energy sources by sealing deals for liquefied natural gas to compensate for the loss of Russian gas and fill its stocks for the winter, while reducing its use of gas and electricity.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Some of Venice's smaller canals have practically dried up due to a prolonged spell of low tides, frustrating boat crews and bewildering tourists. The prolonged stretch of ebb tides is linked to a lingering high-pressure weather system over much of Italy. In midwinter, high atmospheric pressure combined with the lunar cycle produces the ultra-low water levels during ebb tide. The phenomenon highlights the lack of attention to the overdue need for cleaning Venice's intercanal network. Navigation continued on the wider main waterways, including the Grand and Giudice canals. Separately, the same high-pressure system, compounded by scarce alpine snowmelt this year, has been a factor for the shriveling of lakes and rivers in northern Italy in recent weeks. This month, an isthmus linking the shores of Lake Garda to a small island has reemerged, delighting visitors who are able to, in effect, walk partway across the middle of the lake. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.